Hi everyone. This is a session on demand high teaching. We're going to look at the origins of demand high teaching and look at what it is, what it means, but also looking at how you might be able to incorporate demand high teaching techniques into your classes and how it might impact your class. So, demand high teaching came from mainly Jim Scrivener and Adrian Underhill. Scrivener at one point went to observe a, a, a number of different teachers from around the world, and um, his conclusion was that lots of teaching was kind of demand low. This to him meant basically that there were lots of opportunities where meaningful learning could take place, and perhaps it wasn't because maybe teachers were focusing on covering material, maybe going through the motions of exercise one, exercise two, and giving feedback, and then going to exercise three without really digging deeper into why the answers are what they are, or maybe personalizing feedback a little bit more. Then Adrian Underhill got involved as well, and this became something that the industry spoke about for a number of years. This is a screenshot of Adrian Underhill's session at IATEFL a few years back. It was I found it very interesting. He was talking about the ceiling of correctness. So he was talking about teachers who kind of say, okay, yes, this is correct, but correct can't be corrected. You hit a ceiling, and so what he was suggesting was that we use the term upgrade instead of correct. In this way, we can personalize feedback more. Students are a little bit more equal. It's not like this person can do it, they get it correct, and the other person doesn't get it correct. It's what you just said. We can upgrade it in some kind of way, right? So every response from a student can be given feedback on. So, for example, if there is a stronger student in your class and they say something that is maybe an indication that they are a strong student, maybe they get the grammar correct that you're teaching and others aren't. You can obviously highlight this, but you can also look for what it means to upgrade that response that they've given you in class. So the idea here is that anything can be upgraded, and so it's very versatile and flexible and can be used in all classes. Mainly the ceiling of correctness is what interested me, because I'm very keen to not kind of rubber stamp in class, which is where students respond and teachers go, yes, that's correct, or no, that's not correct, and then moving on. It's always, I find, a lot more meaningful to dig a bit deeper and encourage peer correction, self-correction, and that kind of thing. So demand high is not increasing the cognitive load, right? It's not making things more difficult or giving more information. It is giving students the tools to become kind of more capable of answering questions themselves, and also maybe interacting with the material we're using in class a bit more meaningfully. And the last question here is interesting. Is it okay to be unhelpful? This is also something that maybe needs to be balanced, I suppose. In class, you know your class better than anyone. You know your students better than anyone, and you know which students are going to respond better to each kind of technique that you're using. But this idea of being unhelpful in class is quite interesting. I found it interesting back when I was teaching consistently because it meant that when students were giving me responses, I wasn't spoon feeding or rubber stamping. I was trying to kind of take myself a little bit further away from it and trying to get students to self-correct and peer correct. So I was trying to be unhelpful in a way. So this is a picture of Link from Legend of Zelda, kind of highlighting what demand height isn't. So demand height is not a method, and it's not anti any method. It's essentially using what you learn in demand high to do what you already do more meaningfully or kind of in a more skillful way. It's essentially adding another string to your bow, and the idea in lots of video games, Legend of Zelda is one of the most popular video games of all time. You start with a basic character with basic skills, and then you develop the character by helping other characters, overcoming challenges and this kind of thing, solving puzzles. And this is kind of the idea in teaching. We are always kind of, as we gain experience, taking in lots of different techniques, and demand high is a little bit like that. It's something that we can use in class as another element into our lessons. And of course, yes, it's not just being mean, being unhelpful. It's not in the negative sense. It's more seeing how we can empower students to help themselves. So there are many ways that it worked for me, and of course it can work for you. It encourages independence. It encourages students to, it trains them to help themselves a little bit more. Of course, they need a teacher, they need you, but we're not always with them. We can't be there to mediate their conversations all the time. They're going to need to do that themselves, and that empowers them as well. So, firstly, it will encourage autonomy. It will also help you make more use of your materials. I know, we use outcomes. We use usually that double page spread that you get for a Monday, Wednesday, or Friday, and often, you don't really need any supplementary materials. You can, look deeper into each exercise, and the feedback stages of each major stage can take a bit longer because you would be asking kind of more questions and challenging students a little bit more in those stages. And yes, the method is extremely adaptable, so you can do it from with any level, from beginner to advanced to exam classes. You can use them for any of those classes. So far it's been quite theoretical. This is a more kind of practical look at things. So you've got 6 responses or answers given from students and teachers responding. This is an elementary class, and on a scale of 0 to 10, how useful is the teacher's response in these interactions? At this point, feel free to pause the video so you can have some time to have a look at the students' answers and the teacher's responses and giving your own rating. I'll now go through each one and kind of comment on each one. You can compare your answer with me, and of course later on we can discuss this. So the first one, the student says the answer is A, and the teacher is good. Next. This is a classic case of rubber stamping, where a teacher says, yes, that's the answer, and that's it. Finished. We move on. I can see why a teacher might do this, because it might be that the exercise that they're doing is not one that is directly linked to their main objective. But if we assume that these answers are coming from maybe feedback to a major stage. The teacher saying good next is not really digging deep enough to what the answer is, why the answer is what it is. So if the student says that the answer is A, they might have got lucky, they might have guessed, and might not know why the answer is A. The other students might not be clear on why the answer is A. And so good next doesn't really dig deep in any way. So that is not so helpful. The second one, student, yesterday I sleep very well. Teacher says yesterday I slept very well. So this is an on-the-spot correction, which again might work for some students, but it's not clear that the student has acknowledged this correction. It's not clear that they will. It's not even clear that they recognized it or heard it. They might not have noticed the past tense verb there. So again, this is not a very helpful response. It's also not eliciting a response. It's just telling the student, which is not too helpful. The third interaction, student, I went to a restaurant last night, and teacher using finger correction. I went to a restaurant last night. So this is quite helpful because the teacher is eliciting the correction from the student. And of course, if the student doesn't know, the teacher could also kind of go to another student and elicit a response from another student, making it peer correction. So that is quite helpful. Then the next one, the fourth one, I'm visiting my niece next week. Teacher says, excellent, you use the present continuous for future, well done. So this is probably unnecessary use of meta-language. We're not sure if the student understands meta-language or if they've ever come across the terminology for tenses. So not very helpful in that sense. But also, if someone tells me, oh, I'm visiting my niece next week, my probably natural response would be, oh, that's it. Great. You know, what do you usually do with your niece? What have you got planned? How often do you see her? So kind of a more natural response. Of course, you know, if the student is looking for language feedback, we can take a note of that and deal with it later. And, you know, they should be praised for using the present continuous for the future, of course. But this is maybe something that can be done a bit later on. So the fifth interaction, I go to the gym, says the student, and the teacher says, do you go every day? This is an interesting one. Maybe we need a bit more context, but let's say if the teacher is asking students what they did the weekend, the student says, I go to the gym. If the teacher's asking, do you go every day? Perhaps they're trying to elicit the correction. So if the student says, I go to the gym, and they actually mean they went to the gym on Sunday or Saturday, then the student might realize that they've used the wrong form of the verb if the teacher asks, do you go every day? So the question, do you go every day? Clearly that's maybe a way of contrasting the present simple with maybe the past simple. So teachers trying to investigate and dig a little deeper onto whether the student knows that they've used the present simple, and if that's really, you know, them using it correctly and intentionally. So yeah, potentially a good question there. And the final interaction where the student says advice, of course, instead of advice. So here the stress is not quite right. The second syllable would be stressed, and the teacher gives an inquisitive look, maybe tilts their head a bit and goes, this is something that probably you would need to establish in a class. Something that I used to do quite often, and teach students knew to kind of look out for it. If I was giving them an inquisitive look, that probably meant that they needed to rephrase or kind of correct themselves, and then going, is the indication that the stress is not quite where it should be, and hopefully the student then corrects themselves. So again, I would say that's quite a useful response from the teacher, again eliciting a correction from the student as opposed to telling the student what the correction is. So another example here, a really kind of a common saying, tell me I'll forget, show me I may remember, involve me I'll understand. Again, this relates to demand high teaching, because demand high teaching would be involving the student as much as possible, interacting with them a little bit more in order to dig a little bit more deeply into why the answers are what they are, what the student knows, what they don't know, and helping them to upgrade the language. So let's say we display this on the board. There are a number of different things we can do with this. We can ask students how many words are in the quote. We could dictate it maybe. Dictate it and then ask the students how many words they hear. Can get them to say it quickly as they can, slowly and clearly, bringing out the word stress, pronouncing every letter in each word, or maybe not including connected speech and then including connected speech in order to highlight how weird it sounds if you don't use connected speech. Saying it as if you're bored, so bringing in intonation, saying it, joining the words together. Adding another word, so maybe tell me, I'll definitely forget. And then continuing with that, saying it with interest, whispering it, turning it into a question, changing one word for another word, again using intonation, saying it happily. Sorry, my video is in front of those words, but it says say it with your back turned to the class. Maybe highlighting why usually we don't turn our back to the class and speak to people with our backs turned to them. Transform it so that you can use the third conditional, and you could even add inversion in there as well. So many different things that we can do, different levels of challenge. You could do this with a higher level class, or a lower level class. Any material that you're using in class, there are lots of different ways to kind of mine those texts and again dig deeper into or exploiting them as much as possible. So moving on to receiving feedback. So we talked a little bit about errors and feedback. So again, instead of the old rubber stamping and saying, yes, good, next, lots of different things that we can do to not only encourage our students to correct themselves, encourage more autonomy, or encourage peer correction, but we're also actually building a rapport with them, because the more we do this, the more we are interacting with them, and that further builds rapport. So we can indicate errors by raising intonation. So if the student says, I go to the gym yesterday, you could say yesterday, raising your intonation, and then hopefully they correct themselves. Tilting your head slightly, go yesterday. And again, if you do this consistently, then students know if you go like that, maybe they should be correcting themselves. Using finger correction, very useful, especially for word order and missing words or gap fills. You can do that. So adding stress to sentences. So if a student gives you a sentence and it's maybe not enough stress as we would expect, you could repeat the sentence or get them to repeat the sentence and help them to add the stress. So guiding them, facilitating that learning. So if they say, I go to the gym yesterday, it's like, is that every day, or was it just yesterday? So clarifying what they want to say. So you could take a note of the mistake and play sentence hangman a bit later on in class, using an incorrect phoneme. So you could write down any word that they've mispronounced and put an incorrect phoneme and then change it afterwards and get them to correct themselves. Put the sentence on the board, underline problem areas. So this is essentially delayed error correction. So you can do that as well. And using facial expressions, noises, and gestures. So lots of different things, different ways to indicate errors. So finally, we're going to have a look at what a whole lesson, might turn into if we use demand high. Now I've put all of this on the slide. If you want, you can pause and read through it. But I'll kind of comment on it now. So at the start of the lesson, you could actually just not get the students to open their books. They're sitting down, like, keep your books in your bags for now. Then, what did you take from previous lessons this week? Now, what did you take from the previous lessons this week? I think that's an open question that's quite difficult to answer. So it might be, you'll need to know what they did in the previous lessons. So I can see on Tuesday that you did this with Neil, with Betul. How did that go? What did you take from it? So they can continuously have that thread of the week in their head. So once that's done, you could be taking the register and going through it to see who's there, and also asking them how they're doing in different ways. How's it going, Diego? How are you doing? How are you doing, Kubra? Different ways to ask how are you, and then when they give you their responses, not accepting unnatural answers. So kind of correcting them or upgrading their language then, and giving feedback so they feel like they've learned something in the first 5-10 minutes of the class, and then afterwards, of course, you're laying out your objectives. So then after every major stage, when you're giving feedback, of course, we've talked about indicating errors, and then following a major stage in feedback, you can ask them to reflect. So, how well did they do in that task? Reflect on it and give your own opinion. Then also you could just ask them why the teacher decided to do that activity. So sometimes this is a nice thing to do because it kind of it makes things more transparent. So after an activity, I might go, okay, why did we just do that? Why did we do that? It could have been a discussion after a vocabulary exercise, or it could be controlled practice in grammar, and you'll be surprised at how little awareness there is from students on what our aims are for each stage. So then, yes, we feed the language that they wanted but didn't have. Sometimes when you're monitoring, you could be imagining if the students are doing a speaking task. So there's maybe three students in a group doing a speaking task. Sometimes I like to have that conversation in my head, the task that they're doing in my head, with a proficient speaker. So how are we going to have this conversation? And then noticing, okay, I'm using this vocabulary, and taking a note. None of the students are using this, so it's definitely something that I should teach and give them feedback on. It's very useful feedback for them to have. And then, yes, focusing on errors. Constantly comparing language points. Again, I go to the gym is a good example. So always thinking about teaching the tenses not just in kind of isolated days on certain days, but constantly throughout the lessons. And then, of course, putting good examples of good language on the board, as well as errors. Emergent language is crucial. Emergent language is the language that comes up throughout the lesson, but is not necessarily maybe what you have taken into the class. So maybe you've the lesson is I don't know, maybe an English work lesson on finance or something, but maybe a student has said something, they've gone off on a tangent, and something really interesting has come up, and they've used, I don't know, a phrasal verb that not many students use. Put it on the board straight away, because that's great for your bank of lexis that you've got on your board for the lesson. It's something that you can review later on. So emergent language is really useful because it's already real life, right? It's something that they have brought to the class, as opposed to us imposing material onto them. So emergent language is already real life. And of course, we talk about a bank of lexis as opposed to a bank of words, because we focus on phrases as well, on phrases, not just words. So we think about collocation, we think about phrasal verbs, we think about the pronunciation of these as well. And of course, making sure you put that on the board so that you can refer to it later on, and so students can see it, and getting them to take it down in their notebooks so they have a written record of it as well. And at the end of the lesson, we've spoken about this quite often. We've spoken about Feedback Friday in the final 15 minutes. So, again, this is the reflection stage. So we're closing our books, going back to MyEC, putting that on the TV, and asking students how well, or to what extent, do we feel like we've achieved our objectives today. What do you need to know more about? Is there any part of the lesson that you found difficult? Here's some more work from MyEC to do so that you feel more confident on it. What did you find challenging? What do you want to do next week that we didn't do this week? Is there anything that I, as a teacher, am doing that you want to do less of? Are you getting enough speaking? All of this stuff is for the final 15 minutes, and yeah, lots of stuff to kind of go through without adding more material to our lessons. So that's Demand Hub.